Welcome back to MFO, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. You know, this happened to me a week or so ago. I was out fishing on my lake up in Wisconsin, and my lake, I know what color worm to throw. I know where to throw it, things like that. And I also know I can judge just because I've been on the water so much up on that lake. I can judge. Yep, I'm having a pretty typical day. I'm catching about the right amount, 5 fish an hour, something like that, and I can judge it. Well, I went out and I wasn't catching quite as many fish in that first hour as I normally do. And I made a change and it worked. And I want to tell you about that change and what the variables were that made me make that change. I'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Mark Fisher Outdoors, everybody. I'm Mark Fisher. So again, I'm out on the lake and, again, this is my lake up in Wisconsin that I know like the back of my hand. So it really isn't a challenge as much as just a chance to get out, throw a green pumpkin worm around and catch decent fish, right? But on this particular day, I wasn't catching as many as I normally do in the places that I know that there are fish. Well, there was a variable that I didn't recognize until about 45 to 50 minutes into the day, and that was that it was a very overcast and gloomy day. And so I went ahead and I changed my worm color. Instead of throwing a green pumpkin or a watermelon worm, I switched to black. And the minute I changed, I'm talking first cast, that I changed colors, I got bit. And I fished for another 45 minutes, and all of a sudden my catch rate had doubled. And I continued to fish using a black worm rather than a watermelon colored worm. And now I was catching fish at the same rate that I normally would have been catching on that watermelon or green pumpkin worm that I typically use. The difference was that it was an overcast and gloomy day. And I didn't recognize that variable, but when you're working in lower light conditions, those natural colors seem to get lost because there's not as much light penetration going on. Everything else was pretty much the same kind of conditions. It was the same lake, same places, things like that. Not a whole lot of other variables had changed. But with the gloomier conditions and the lower light levels, just switching to a bait that was darker and gave more of a silhouette allowed those fish to pick up on that worm as it was moving through the water column, and boom, I'm right back into a position of being able to catch fish. This is what I wanted to talk about today, is the fact that we love fishing because there are so many different variables. And once we key in on, hey, I think I got the right bait and the right color in the right places at the right time, we tend to stick with that day after day, trip after trip, every time we go there. But when a variable like the time of day or whether there's clouds or not and things like that reduces visibility, we have to be able to respond to it. I could have just as easily thought, the fish aren't biting as much today. Maybe it's because of the change in weather. Maybe it's because of there's a pressure system coming through and they're not biting as much. They were biting just as much as they do on any other day. In fact, they were biting just as much as they did the day before, because I was out fishing the day before throwing the green pumpkin and got the same number of bites. But because it got cloudy, I had to switch the color, and boom, they were biting just as much and just as eagerly and in the same places after I switched colors. But had I kept the same color, I would have thought that maybe they're not biting as much. So Don't get fooled into thinking that a variable maybe is keeping them from biting as much as that variable may be keeping them from seeing the bait or reacting to the bait, and try changing up some of what you have control over, whether it's the color of the bait, the size of the bait, or the places that you're throwing. I hope this makes sense, guys. Just a little tip that I wanted to share based on an experience that I had a couple of weeks ago. Hope this helps. Guys, speaking of helping, I hope that what we put out here helps you guys become better fishermen. We would certainly appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. We would appreciate that. Send in your comments, hit the like button, and we'll see you again tomorrow for another episode of Mark Fisher Outdoors. Take care, everybody.